Let's take a look at 2017 Macro FRQ number 3. All right, there it is. Okay, so a country is at full employment and producing two types of goods, consumer goods and capital goods. Okay, so part A, draw a correctly labeled graph of the PPC with consumer goods in the horizontal axis, capital goods in the vertical axis, indicate a point that represents full employment and a possible combination in which both goods are being produced. Okay, so a PPC curve, and they're very particular about what goes where. So let's draw this. So they want consumer goods down here. And they want capital goods up here. Okay, so we know that there is some sort of trade-off, right? So let's draw a curve like that. Indicate a point that represents full employment. Well, full employment on a PPC curve is essentially utilization of all resources, right? So it should be on your curve, and they want us to label that X. So we're going to come back to this graph in a minute and indicate another point in part C. But if there were a situation, now this one says full employment, right? So this is key. If you were for some reason in a recessionary gap, you would not be utilizing all resources, right? Unemployment would be above full employment level, and then you would be somewhere inside the PPC curve. So we don't need that for this question, but it's good to understand sort of, that relationship if it ever came up in a different question. Okay, so let's see, that's part A. We've got a combination. They just wanted to make sure you're on the curve, right? So you're not, on one of it where we're producing all consumer goods. They don't want that. So you're producing some combination of both. All right, part B. Assume there is an increase in the country's national savings. Draw a correctly labeled graph of the loanable funds market showing the change in the real interest rate from the increase in savings. So we got increase in savings. Let's draw another graph over here. And this is the loanable funds market, right? So we've got the real interest rate, let's call it. And let's call this the quantity of loanable funds. Okay, so let's draw our curves. So we got demand curve, we've got a supply curve. All right, so what happened? Increase in the country's national savings, right? So that's going to increase your supply. People are saving more money, right? And we want to show the change in the interest rate. So you find your points over here. Let's call this R1. Let's call this R2. If you want to do your quantities, you can do that as well. So let's see, this was supply 1, this was supply 2. So we started, Q1 and then Q2. But what we see here is a reduction in the interest rate, right, due to the increase in supply. So, yep, we show that on our graph, and we clearly see that the interest rates are decreasing due to this effect. All right, now on the same graph from part A, so we're going to go back to our initial graph, show another point labeled Z that represents full employment and a new combination of consumer goods and capital goods consistent with the increase in the country's national savings. So they're asking here, what's going to happen to this point given that this now happened, right? We increased our savings, the interest rate decreased. They also said we're still at full employment, right? So we know we're going to be on the curve. The question is, which way do we move? Right? Do we move closer towards consumer goods, where we consume more consumer goods than we did previously and less capital goods? Or do we move the other way, right? Do we move towards more capital goods and less consumer goods? Well, so the answer lies in this shift over here, right? So interest rates are decreasing. That is going to stimulate investment, right? Investment in capital goods. Capital goods are things that are used to produce other things, right? So think factories, right? Lower interest rates lead to higher investment in capital formation. So your point Z doesn't really matter so long as it's on this curve to the left somewhere of this X point, right? The point being that we recognize that because interest rates are lower, we're now going to consume a little bit more capital goods relative to consumer goods that we were consuming before. All right, so that is part C. Now part D, referring to your answer to part C, will the long run aggregate supply curve shift to the right, shift to the left, or remain the same? And then they want an explanation. Okay, so long run aggregate supply curve shifts to the right. And your explanation is going to have something to do with this investment and capital formation. So let's quick sketch it out, right? So long run aggregate supply curve is vertical, right? And it's vertical at the point where you have output at full employment. Well, if you're increasing capital formation, right? We're having more and more factories, let's just say. Well, then in the future, we're going to be able to produce more, right? So at the same employment level, we are shifting this curve outward, right? So that shift rightward in long run aggregate supply curve represents economic growth. It's the net effect of increased investment and capital formation. So the answer here is this curve shifts to the right. And a sentence or two explaining that logic, and using this word capital formation, I think is your best option there.